So you're a Viking in Greenland. The year is 1349. Things are lit. Walrus ivory is flying off the shelves. You still have to rely on shipments from Iceland to get things like iron and food supplements, but there's so much money to be made that investors in Norway don't seem to have a problem with sending you gold and food in exchange for valuable ivory. Until there is a problem. The shipments become sporadic, and then they stop coming. Your people begin to starve, and then they begin to leave. Hundreds of years later, archaeologists will find the ruins of your churches and taverns and barns and ask, what the heck happened here? Climate change. That's what the heck happened here. Okay, let's review. The Little Ice Age was a period of cooling that started around 1300 and ended around 1850. The dates are a little squishy. We know that it affected the Northern Hemisphere, namely Europe, because that's where the best record keeping was, but it might have happened in other countries, or was documented and the documentation was destroyed. We covered why this might have happened in our last video. But what does a little cold weather have to do with Vikings, who lived in the cold weather and seemed to love it? It's the same exact reason we, in a modern, digital, extremely online society, should be paying attention. So to explain the tie between Vikings and Greenland and climate change, we have to go back approximately 30 years before the ships stopped arriving. This is the timescale we'll be using to explain the effects of climate change, from 1310 to 1340. A Chinese researcher recently broke down the cause and effects of how climate change disrupts societies. Agriculture is the first thing that's disrupted. Later freezes kill fruit on trees, early freezes shorten the harvest season, and bad weather in between can seriously damage crop yields. For England, we know that all of the country's crops failed in 1315. They failed the next summer too. As grain became scarce, prices skyrocketed. Historians called this the Great Famine, which is closely followed by... Conflict had never been a stranger to Western Europe, but the famine changed English society from a place where you could go to a tournament, where knights were still operating under, quote, chivalry, to a place that looked more like this. Conflict and repeating bouts of smaller famine made these folks extremely susceptible to disease. Like, medicine wasn't exactly at its peak in the 1300s, but this made it even worse. In 1347, the bubonic plague would be brought to Europe through the trade routes of the Mediterranean. If you're keeping count, this is the last horseman. Modern estimates place the fatality rate at anywhere from a fifth to a third of Europe, which exacerbated the already cooling weather as the amount of people to till farmyards and raise livestock shrank. In 1349, the plague landed in Norway on a ship from England. Remember the Vikings we left in the beginning?
Oh, shit! A rat!
Yeah, the sailors and investors and merchants responsible for supplying them simply died or ran out of resources because others had died. Not to mention, because of climate change, the oceans had become way more treacherous for long-distance travel. New ivory routes were being opened up from Africa. The world slowly recovered, reconnected, and rebuilt, while adapting to the new normal of a freezing Europe. The Vikings on the edge of the world were pretty much forgotten. And despite our hyper-connected world and agriculture sector that sees the benefit of genetically modified crops, drones that can target weeds, and modified soil biomes to help plants, we are still at risk for the kind of collapse the Vikings faced. Because our agricultural industries are large, they are highly specialized, which means that each is less resilient to things like drought or disease. We overdraw from established resources. We are overdependent on fossil fuels, and we concentrate growing all of our food in too few places. You might be thinking, you're being too negative. Yeah, but we're also human. So when a bad drought causes corn prices to go up, that causes meat and dairy prices to go up. Because we are so mobile and we meet so many more people every day than our ancestors, disease can spread much more quickly. We have seen the effects of these issues already. But what happens when we're in trouble and help is too far away? Well, if we're most of Europe, we descend into whatever this is. But not everywhere in Europe was devastated by climate change. In fact, in the north, there was one place that adapted and bloomed. But that's for the next video.